Good evening and welcome to Cibolo Creek Community Church Online. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for this Good Friday gathering. I've really been looking forward to spending this time with you, and I'm just really glad that all of us could be together for this experience. I'm here tonight with Matt Rector, our worship pastor, and we're going to spend some time reflecting on the significance of this particular day in the life of Jesus those many years ago. I don't know what it is about Good Friday, but I've always been intrigued, mesmerized about what this evening must have been like, particularly for the disciples. These men and women who had followed Jesus now for 3 years, they had listened to his teachings, they had banked on his promises, and they had all these expectations about who Christ was and who he would be in the future and their relationship to all of that. And then it all so dramatically changed. This evening that we call Good Friday, these 2,000 years ago, must have been a very interesting set of hours for them. We know from reading the Gospels that the disciples, they were hiding in either their own homes or in rooms together behind locked doors, in fear of their lives, in fear that the Roman authorities and the Jewish authorities would come looking for them next with the hopes of squashing all this talk about the Jesus guy. And so we know they were hiding. We know that earlier in the day they had witnessed the gruesome crucifixion of Jesus Christ. They had watched his dead body be taken down off of the cross and taken off to burial. And then we find them just with this haunting stillness, this eerie quiet for the rest of the evening. I would imagine that each one of them were lost in their thoughts, their feelings, their fear, and their confusion. Probably much like some of us are feeling tonight with all of the different things that are going on in our world and in our life. I'm glad you're here tonight because we want to talk a little bit about the hope that we find in Jesus Christ, even in times like this. To begin, I want to lead us in a word of prayer, and then Matt's going to lead us in a couple of songs to just sort of center our souls in a place of worship for our time together. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you. We thank you on this side of the cross for all that Good Friday stands for. We thank you for the salvation that we enjoy through faith in Jesus Christ. We thank you for the many blessings that comes with being in a relationship with Jesus Christ. God, we thank you for those disciples who have taught us so much about what it means to follow your Son, Jesus. We think of them on this evening some 2,000 years ago and what we could learn from them on that particular night. So we welcome your presence into this time together. We look forward to meeting with you. In the name of Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. So at about this hour, some 2,000 years ago, we find the disciples behind locked doors, I'm sure overwhelmed with confusion. It had all happened so quickly. One moment they're sitting at a table celebrating the Passover feast with Jesus. The next moment they're in a grove of olive trees surrounded by an angry mob with torches and weapons that have arrived to arrest Jesus. And what we learn in the Gospels is that when it got really dicey, every one of the disciples fled into the darkness. Every one of Jesus' closest friends and followers totally abandoned him in the moment when he needed them the most. The people who should have been the last to desert him did. That's where we pick up the story according to the Gospel of Mark. It's interesting. One of the disciples that ran off into the darkness that night, his name was Peter. Peter evidently circled back around and followed the crowd from a distance, I guess out of curiosity to see what would happen to Jesus. Peter would be the one who would then tell those events of that night to a young man named Mark. Years later, Mark and Peter would have a friendship with one another, and Peter would share with Mark his eyewitness accounts to the life of Jesus. That's what we know as the Gospel of Mark. And so we pick up the story in the Gospel of Mark on this particular night that Jesus was arrested. And Mark makes a special note of the fact that Peter was warming himself by a fire, much like this one here this evening. He was probably sitting there by the fire, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible, and yet watching and listening to everything that was happening out of curiosity about what would happen to Jesus, his rabbi. And we read in the Gospel of Mark these words: "They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together." Now, I want you to remember who was in the room at the time. The high priest, the chief priest, the elders, or the civic leaders of the Jews, and the teachers of the law, those who would have been most familiar with the instructions of the Old Testament. And Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And there he sat with the guards, and he warmed himself at the fire. And the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and they gave this false testimony about him. "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this man-made temple in 3 days, and I'll build another temple not made by man.' Yet even their testimony did not agree." Then the high priest stood up before them and he asked Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent, and he gave no answer. And again the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus. "And you will see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds in heaven." And the high priest, he tore his clothes. "Why do we need any more witnesses?" he asked. "You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" Then they all condemned him as worthy of death. Now listen to what Mark notes. "Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, and they struck him with their fist. And they said in a mocking tone, 'Prophesy.' So they blindfolded Jesus, they struck him and spit on him, and they challenged him to identify who it was that was striking him. Now it says some of them. So who was in the room? In the room was the high priest, the chief priest, the elders, and the teachers of the law. The most religious people in the community of Jesus were the ones who were abusing Jesus, their Messiah. It just strikes me that the ones who should have known better, they didn't. And then Mark moves from what might be perceived as a national look at the events of Jesus' life to an individual look. And so he continues that while Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by, and when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. "Wait a second, you also were with the Nazarene Jesus," she said. But Peter denied it. "I don't know or understand what you're talking about," he said. And he went out into the entryway. And when the servant girl saw him there, she said to them standing around, "This fellow's one of them." And again he denied it. And after a little while, those standing near said to Peter, "You really are one of them. You're a Galilean." And he began to call down curses on himself, and he swore to them, "I don't know this man that you're talking about." And immediately the rooster crowed a second time, and Peter remembered the words of Jesus who had spoken to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times." And Peter broke down and he wept. It's interesting. If you read the Gospels, Peter is almost portrayed as like the favorite disciple. He was certainly the one that Jesus made the greatest investment in. Jesus had been so loyal to Peter throughout his life. And in this moment, Peter refused to be loyal to Jesus. The one who should have been the most loyal to Jesus wasn't. So what do we have so far? We have those who should have been the last to desert Jesus, they did. Those who should have known who Jesus was the most, they didn't. And the one who should have been the most loyal to Jesus refused to be. I wonder if we see ourselves in that story. You know, before we're too quick to judge Peter, the chief priest, the high priest, the elders, I think of the words of Jesus in another episode of his life where people were quick to judge others, and Jesus said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." I wonder sometimes if those of us as Christ followers who are committed to our faith, who ought to be the ones who best understand who Jesus is, that we don't. We don't always obey Jesus or recognize him to hold the authority and the power and the privilege that he should have in our lives. We don't understand him like we should. And sometimes we're not always as loyal to Jesus as we should be. And boy, if anybody should be loyal to Jesus, it should be us, because in his amazing grace, his forgiveness, his death on our behalf, we owe him our lives. We owe him our entire eternity. And yet, all too often, we let other priorities and other pursuits be more important to us than Jesus. But that's what makes what happens next in the story so significant. You see, what happens next in the story is the cross. Just a few hours later, Jesus would willingly offer himself as a sacrifice for sinners. He'd hang on the cross and he'd die as a payment for the sins of the whole world. And he was dying for us, those of us who should know better but don't, those of us who should be most loyal but aren't. Jesus died for us, to offer us the forgiveness of our sin. So tonight, what I want us to take away from this stroll down the significant events of this Friday evening some 2,000 years ago, I just want us to take a few minutes to be thankful for the forgiveness that we have from God through the death of Jesus Christ. I just want us to be grateful for how much we've been forgiven. So, as we conclude our time together tonight, I'd like to invite us to just enjoy this last song as a reminder that Jesus, He paid it all for us so that He could extend to us His forgiveness, for which we should always be deeply grateful.
Watch and pray, find in me thine all in all. 'Cause Jesus paid it all, and all to Him I owe. My sin had left a crimson stain, He washed it white as snow. Indeed I find thy power and thine alone can change the leopard's spots and melt the heart of stone. Jesus paid it all, and all to Him I owe. My sin had left a crimson stain, He washed it white as snow. Before the throne I stand in Him complete. Jesus died my soul to save. My lips shall still repeat, 'cause Jesus paid it all, and all to Him I owe. My sin had left a crimson stain, He washed it white as snow. My sin had left a crimson stain, He washed it white as snow. He washed it white as snow. He washed it white as snow. As we worship tonight, just think about the price that he has paid for us. He paid our debt with his blood on the cross. Let's give him thanks, singing, oh, praise the one who paid my debt. Let's sing together where you are. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. It's Jesus, yeah. Jesus paid it all, and all to him I owe. My sin had left a crimson stain, and he washed it white as snow.
So, what do we have here this evening? We have the ones who should have deserted Jesus last. They did. The ones who should have known who Jesus was the best. They didn't. And the one who should have been the most loyal to Jesus, they weren't. And yet, what we find at the end of the story is that the ones who should have been forgiven the most, they were. All because of Jesus. Tonight, we celebrate that through Jesus Christ and his death on the cross, we are all forgiven. Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for these moments together. Thank you for Jesus Christ and his death on our behalf. Thank you for the payment that was paid for our sin, and that through our faith in your Son Jesus Christ, we can be completely forgiven of everything and all things that we've done. Father, thank you for your outrageous grace and your amazing love. Thank you for what this weekend is all about. And with eager hearts, we look forward to gathering together again on Sunday to celebrate the resurrection of our Lord and our Savior, Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen.